Good morning. All I can say is, where's my chainsaw when I really need it? When I was a kid, Christmas lasted till January 6th. So Merry Christmas. I think Walmart was closed on Christmas Day. I said they were decorating for next Christmas. And that just seems to be the way of the world. But this is a time of reflection and a time when we start getting all juiced up for this coming year. Bob, I'm glad to have you, but do you miss Florida?
I'm adapting.
You're adapting. How about to the cold weather? How you doing there? You're still adapting?
I'm adapting.
All right. We're entering into the book of First Samuel. And so there is a timeline. You see the line there for Samuel. I hope you can see it. Up in the top right, you see David, and I had my own simplified timeline where David was 1,000 and Abraham is 2,000 and Moses was right in the middle. But I also want you to pay attention to Samson, where Samson and Samuel, for some degree, were contemporaries. And the reason that's important is Samson began to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. We read when we went through the book of Judges that all these different people oppressed the Israelites, but the Philistines ruled over the Israelites. And when Samson brought down that temple and he killed thousands, a lot of the leaders and the military strategists were gone. And so that set things up for Samuel. So there's another view of First Samuel. We're going to go from Samuel. He was a prophet, a priest, and a judge. We'll swing over to Saul, a man after man's own heart, and then ultimately David, a man after God's own heart. This is the Apostle Paul's summary of the book First Samuel. He said, all this took about 450 years, and after that he gave them judges until Samuel the prophet. Then they asked for a king, and God gave them Saul, the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for 40 years. And when he had removed him, he raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, I have found in David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will. Who's that guy? Bob Dylan. In the 60s, he sang this song, The Times They Are A-Changing. And if we look at our nation, the times were changing. There was a Vietnam War. There were civil rights going on. There was a sexual revolution. And it seems like our country hasn't gone back to what I call the age of innocency, right? There's a television show, Happy Days, the 50s. And if those of us that lived in the 50s, they were happy days. But this is what's happening in a transition in the nation of Israel. The book of Judges ended with this verse. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And what we're going to see in 1 Samuel is that there will be a king in Israel, and people will have come back to the Lord. So Samuel changed the course of the nation. One man changed that course of a nation. I'm going to fast forward several hundred years. We're going to be bouncing back and forth in a timeline. This is Ezekiel. And this is a time when the nation was going downhill. It already split north and south. And I sought for a man among them who should build up the wall and stand in the breach before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none. Therefore, I have poured out my indignation upon them. I have consumed them with the fire of my wrath. I have returned their way upon their heads, declares the Lord. But Samuel was one man who stood in the breach and changed the course of the nation. We're going to take a look at Samuel's character. I'll blow that up for you a little bit. We're going to take a look at Samuel's character. 1 Samuel chapter 12. We haven't gotten to chapter 1 yet, so just bear with me, all right? This is towards the end of Samuel's career as a judge and as a prophet. And Samuel said to all Israel, behold, I have obeyed your voice in all that you have said to me, and have made a king over you. And now, behold, the king walks before you, and I am old and gray, and behold, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my youth until this day, and here I am. Testify against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Of whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes with it? Testify against me, and I will restore it to you. And they said, you have not defrauded us, or oppressed us, or taken anything from any man's hand. And he said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand. And they said, he is witness. Now, Chuck Swindoll says that of all the major characters in the Old Testament, the one where there was really no documented flaw was Daniel. And I'll follow up behind that and say there were two that were really close, okay? You have Joseph, and I'm thinking the only fault that Joseph had was he tried to help God a little bit by taking the cupbearer to, don't forget me when you go before Pharaoh. And then we have Samuel, and we're going to touch upon this. Samuel's sons were not as clean as Samuel. And we'll come into the father-son relationship over time. The company that Samuel keeps. My mother would tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. All right? Names in Hebrews chapter 11. Now, chapter 11 mentions some other situations, but not by name. But there you see Samuel, and you already read the other names. Psalm 99 says this, Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Samuel also was among them who called upon his name. Think of the generations of priests from Aaron right on down to Caiaphas. All those priests, 1,500 years, and Samuel's name is mentioned. Look at this, again in the face of the upcoming Babylonian captivity. Then the Lord said to me, though Moses and Samuel stood before me, yet my heart would not turn toward this people. Send them out of my sight and let them go. Imagine the intercessory prayer power that Samuel had for the Lord to mention him out of all those hundreds of years of personalities. Other notables. In Ezekiel, we see Noah, Daniel, and Job. Even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were here, declares the Lord, they would not deliver son or daughter. Again, in the face of the Babylonian captivity, even these guys, if they were intercessors, would not change God's mind. James says this, behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job and have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. I highlighted the word Job because I want to showcase a current events name. Ken Cullen. Who knows Ken Cullen? Okay. Ken Cullen was a veterinarian who had to retire because his body was falling apart. He's sitting in a rehab center down in the very bottom of Virginia, hoping to move to another better rehab center. And I pop his phone number up there because who has seen the movie Groundhog Day? For Ken Cullen, every day is Groundhog Day. It's the same thing again and again and again. And if you're not writing down that phone number, see me after church and I'll give it to you because he would really love to have a phone call. Okay, key verses in 1 Samuel. Samuel 8. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel threw a fit. No, I think that's what I might have done. And Samuel did what? He prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, they have rejected the Lord. They've rejected the Lord from being king over them. God desires to be king over us, and he will have a theocracy where the King of Kings and Lord of Lords comes before us. But you know what? We can have our own individual theocracies. When we study the book of Ruth, Elimelech, his name means my God is the Lord is my king. We can have our own individual theocracies if we put him in charge. They've not rejected you, Samuel. They've rejected me. And then chapter 13, now your kingdom, talking about Saul, now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be the prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. We're going to take a look at those first few chapters as an outline, his birth, his growth and call, his ministry, and how the nation started to change. So, overview of the first half of 1 Samuel, Israel's last judge. Just like we studied the book of Ruth, and I said the individual names and their meanings gave the story, the same is true in 1 Samuel. The names and their meanings give the story. First, his mother's name was Hannah, which means grace. And God gave her grace because she was barren, but ultimately he blessed her with 5 children, 3 boys, 2 girls. She had this baby named Samuel. And the Bible says she named him Samuel because she asked of the Lord. Literally, those words mean God heard. So that's a closed loop, because I can ask God all kinds of things, and God always hears and answers prayers. It's yes and no and wait a while. In Hannah's case, it was wait a while, and then it was yes. And so you can call Samuel whatever you want. Ask of God or God heard. The dad's name was Elkanah, which means acquired of God. Now, what's interesting about that language versus our language is we've got a collection of prepositions, where the Hebrew, you have to look at the context of the preposition. So in English, we could say asked from God, or acquired from God, or we could say acquired by God. The context doesn't tell us which it is. Could it be that Elkanah's mother was about as barren as Hannah, and so as Elkanah was being raised, he had a sensitivity towards a barren wife? He ended up with a second one, but did not divorce the first one. Could it be acquired by God, where God needed a very special man who could love on Hannah through her barrenness and care for her as she was there knitting or sewing or weaving the little jackets for Samuel year after year? He was a special dad. There are lots of special dads in the Bible. The dad of Samson is no exception. Acquired of God. So the book of Proverbs tells us this: 3 things are never satisfied, and 4 never say enough. Hell, the barren womb, the land never satisfied with water. And we're going to see the unsatisfied barren womb is going to irritate Hannah thanks to the other wife. His service and special call. Eli, the name means the Lord is lifted up, and his sons Hophni and Phinehas mean fighter and brazen mouth. And when you see the lifestyle of Hophni and Phinehas, you can understand where one is the enforcer and one is the loudmouth. But the name Eli means the Lord is lifted up. The sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. But this is also in chapter 2, God speaking to Eli, you honor your sons above me. Those sons were adults. God is chastising Eli for not chastising his sons. Dads, what is our responsibility when our kids have grown and gone? There's a great case in point. Billy Graham had this son, Franklin, who was a wild and crazy guy. And I don't know the relationship between those two, what kinds of words were shared across each other, but Franklin finally came back to the Lord. What a wonderful man. And so I give you this verse for each of us to pray, what should be our relationship with our grown kids? And so it was Eli's lack of attention that brought judgment on the family. So then we move into Samuel's leadership of Israel. Here he is, this little kid that was dropped off at the temple and becomes the nation's leader. Eli's sons died in battle. Eli and Ichabod died the same day. There was a prophecy that said in one day, both those sons would die, Eli would die, and Ichabod, Eli's grandson, would die. Now, everybody knows that the name Ichabod means the Lord has departed. Well, just like Samuel doesn't really literally mean asked of God, the word Ichabod means where is the glory? And so Eli's daughter-in-law named Ichabod, the Lord has departed, where the glory of the Lord has departed. That is to say, where is the glory? They lost the ark for 7 months, and we'll be going through all this stuff in more detail. And Samuel prophesied not the return of the Lord, but the return to the Lord. He prophesied that Israel was going to turn from no king in Israel, and everybody was going to do what was right in their own eyes, to honoring the Lord. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. In other words, he didn't waste any words. When he said something, older people would remember the stockbroker E.F. Hutton, and the commercials were when E.F. Hutton speaks, everyone listens, and then they freeze the commercial. That would be Samuel. When he had something to say, it was worth saying. And Samuel said to the house of Israel, if you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines, contrasted with the verse we already saw where Samson was beginning to deliver them. Chapter 7. And the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far as below Bethkar. And then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen and called its name Ebenezer, for he said, till now the Lord has helped us. Ebenezer is a really interesting name. What it's saying is the Lord has helped us up until now. There's no guarantee that the Lord will continue, because there's no guarantee that the people are going to continue to live for the Lord. And so the Lord has helped us up until now. So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel, and the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of his life. The phrase all the days of his life is very important because the Philistines are still in Israel. They were off while Samuel was around. You'd see contention between Saul and the Philistines, enter Goliath. And you see where the Philistines were in their own territory because David had to go and leave the land of Israel when he's on the run from Saul. So they were subdued. They went from being rulers over Israel to being exiled from Israel under the hand of Samuel. And then the transition to the monarchy. Samuel was getting old, and he hoped to pass the leadership to his sons. They weren't kings, but it was sort of like the priesthood was to pass from Aaron on down. But the notion of being a judge, the being a leader, was not that way. We studied the book of Judges, and people were popping up from different geographies, different tribes, different backgrounds. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. And Samuel anointed Saul, warned the people, and moved into the background of the story. You don't see Samuel again until Saul, through the witch, calls him back up out of the grave. And that takes us to chapter 1. We might even cover chapter 1 today. There was a certain man of Ramath Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim. It was 15 miles from Shiloh. Shiloh was where the Ark of the Covenant was. 15 miles to you and me is no big deal. I drove 12 miles to come here today, but he didn't have a car and he didn't have a highway and he had a lot of kids in tow. And so 15 miles was quite the trek. There was a certain man whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite, which means full. He was full. He had 2 wives. Solomon had 1,000 women he was dealing with, and they call him the wisest. You know, that part I don't quite understand. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children. The name Peninnah means pearl or ruby or coral. And this is one of those names of irony because she was anything but a precious stone. But Hannah had no children. And that's how the story starts. There's Elkanah, acquired of God, has 2 wives. The one has kids in tow. The other one has none. Now, this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts. The phrase Lord of hosts appears in Scripture 245 times. It is used for the first time as someone is saying a prayer, and that would be Hannah. And what she's saying is, Lord, you're in charge of the universe as we know it, and you're in charge of the universe as we've never even imagined it. Can I please have a baby? She was calling on the Lord of everything. And so they went down to Shiloh where Eli was there with the 2 sons. And on the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah, he gave a double portion because he loved her. Now, there's no emphasis on some words, so it doesn't mean because he loved her and not Peninnah, but because he loved her, he's trying to make her happy. Keep in mind, the book of Proverbs says the barren womb is never satisfied. So she gets the double portion. Now, why was Peninnah so aggravating to Hannah? We're going to see that in a little bit. It has to do with the estate. Keeping in mind, when dad dies, the estate goes to the son. Which one? We'll figure it out. The estate goes to the son, and widows don't own anything. Widows don't have Social Security. Widows have no welfare system. Remember Ruth and Naomi. And so there's Peninnah. She's in line for her son to get the estate. And if she's mean to Hannah while Elkanah's still alive, what's she going to do to Hannah when Elkanah passes? And so we read, if a man has 2 wives, the one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him children. And if the firstborn son belongs to the unloved, then on the day when he assigns his possessions as an inheritance to his sons, he may not treat the son of the loved as the firstborn of the preference to the son of the unloved. In other words, the estate was going to Peninnah's son. But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the first fruits of his strength. So now we are back in 1 Samuel, and her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. And so there you have 2 universal songs that the kids sing, and in this case, the adult was singing. Some people, na, 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 na. I didn't know the other one until I met my wife, Nanny, Nanny, Boo Boo. I never heard that one. I grew up in a coal mining cloister. But yet we knew that na, 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 na song. I have babies and you don't. Wait till Elkanah dies. I'm going to kick you out of the house. Too bad for you. So it went on year by year. And I'm going to suppose it didn't start and stop with their visits to Shiloh. I'm going to suppose it went on day after day. And I don't know how much real estate Elkanah owned. I don't know how big his house, but can you imagine? You know, the saying is there's no kitchen big enough for 2 women. Imagine these two. And Hannah, meaning grace, I'm just going to suppose that she showed Peninnah grace, even though her heart was crushed. Therefore, Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? In other words, I am so wonderful. What's your problem? That's just what she needed. Peninnah's piling on top of her, and so is the husband as well. So she's being totally desperate. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, I'm pausing here and doing a break there. There is a snapshot of current day Israel. On the very top of that hill, you see an Israel settlement, but then you see this little mound in the center there. And that's where the tabernacle was set up, because what their custom was, they would bring their meals to, there were 3 feasts per year they were supposed to come, and they would bring their meals and they would eat in the sight of the tabernacle. And when they were done, they would break their pottery and then go home. And so what did the archaeologists find? Everywhere where that knoll was in sight, there was broken pottery everywhere. But in the section where you couldn't see that knoll, no broken dishes. And so that's where the ark resided. And we're going to talk about what kind of enclosure was the ark in. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah arose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Now, when you study temple, the Jewish people talk about Solomon's temple as the first temple era, and they talk about Herod's temple as the second temple era. But that word, that Hebrew word hekal, is first used right here. And then it's once again used as the Lord is describing to David and to Solomon how to build the Hekal, which tells me that they built some kind of permanent structure that the ark was in, okay? So Eli is sitting next to a doorpost, and she was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. Now, I enjoy these pictures, right? And I look at them and I say, well, what is right in them and what is wrong with them? And so I'm just going to share these things with you. So first of all, Eli was not wearing the ephod because he was 80 plus years old, and the ephod was passed to the next generation once they hit 60. He was still considered a priest, but he was not the high priest. Secondly, where is it? There we are. She did not look like that. She looks angelic. This is for a kid's Sunday school class. Imagine a lady that's been pounded year after year, and she just made that vow, and she wept bitterly. My guess is her face was swollen, and her eyes were red, and the tears were running down if she even had any more. And Eli looks at her, and he judges and says, you must be drunk. I never met a drunk that looked like that. Okay? As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart. Only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Paul tells us this in the book of Romans. He says, likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we did not know what to pray for as we ought. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. I look back in my own history, and the one time I can think of, especially, was when Leah was in surgery. And all I could say was, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And my mind was doing all kinds of other things, but I couldn't come out with any words. And that's where Hannah was. It was beyond words. She was brokenhearted. She was crushed by those around her. She was crushed by even Eli. She was crushed by her own husband who loved her because he didn't have the sensitivity to simply say with sincerity, I feel your pain. And so this woman is squashed. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, no, my Lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Now, I don't suppose Hannah was saving her prayers for just her visits to Shiloh. And I don't suppose she quit praying when she was given that baby boy. We're going to read where she was making little jackets for him and giving to him. And my guess, with every stitch, with every pull of the loom, whatever she was doing, it was another prayer. And that's a relationship of moms to kids. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. And then Eli answered, keep in mind, she didn't tell him what she was praying for, but yet he says, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, let your servant, I'm going to jump over to King James for the moment, because King James, for both Hannah and Mary, use the same word, handmaid. And those of us that have grown up in King James, it hits us, at least it hits me a special way. And she said, let your handmaid find favor. Let your handmaid find grace. Let your handmaid find Hannah. Let my name be realized in your eyes. And then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Fast forward to Mary 1,000 years later. And Mary said, behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it done unto me according to thy word. These people in the Bible times were well versed in the Old Testament. And could it be that Mary, with Gabriel right there, was rehearsing's the wrong word, but thinking through Hannah and the message that she got, and the Hannah's response, let your servant find favor. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord, and then they went back to their house at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. And the Lord heard Samuel. The man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him, so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. Now, we don't know, and the Bible doesn't tell us how the relationship between Peninnah and Hannah had changed. We don't know, as Peninnah and her kids in tow went up to Shiloh, how or if Hannah was missed. We're going to find that Hannah was blessed with 5 more children, and we don't know when in the timeline they were there. Was Samuel off to the Lord and then the kids come? We don't know. But she said, my place is in the home. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Now, my understanding is in Bible times, you waited till you were like 2 or 3 years old before you were weaned. I remember reading a book when I was in high school. A tree grows in Brooklyn, and there was a kid in that book named Gussie, and Gussie was still nursing when he was 7. The Bible doesn't tell us how old Samuel was when Hannah released him, but he was certainly of a tender age. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. When we studied the Levitical sacrifices, we talked about the different kinds of animals, the bull and the sheep, and right on down to the turtle doves. And after the turtle doves, if you still don't have enough money, a scoop of grain will do. And so we said that Elkanah was an Ephrathite. He was full. And so he was a man of means because she had a bull. So she brings the bull and she brings the flour, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, and the child was young. And they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli, and she said, "Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to the Lord." And I guess at this point, her face did look like that picture that we shared. "For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord, and as long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." Now, we do things backwards. We have a dedication where we say we're dedicating that child to the Lord. Now we're saying that child is with us. We're stewards of that child, and then he goes. Hopefully, parents go before kids. But in this case, it was the other way around. She said, he's going to the Lord, and someday when I'm in heaven, he'll be heaven, we'll be reunited. It was a backward situation. And I don't know how she did that. And he worshiped the Lord there. Wasn't Eli. Look at the he's and think about your English grammar. Samuel worshiped the Lord there. He was of an age where he was weaned, but he was of an age where he understood the Lord. Jesus said to the apostles that we should have faith like little children. And there's those little kids down the hallway. And some have grown to know the Lord. Some have not grown yet, but they're certainly able to worship. There's some down there that have accountability that may not know the Lord. And so I don't know about you, but every time my face goes down that hallway, I pray for all the souls that are on that side of this campus. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah, and the boy was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. So Hannah turns the son over. She goes home and deals with her other 5. And my guess is her prayer ministry did not quit.